Okay, well, hopefully you got some information off of that video that you found useful, and let's move on to erotic touch. Okay, so there are a lot of things that could be incorporated under erotic touch, and kissing would be the first one. Kissing is thought to have evolved as a way to allow partners to assess potential health. There are a lot of nerve endings in our mouth and on our lips and our tongues and stuff like that. And so, it feels really good. And then also, getting up close to each other allows us to breathe in each other's breath, and it can, assess oral health. It can assess, the presence of phlegm and other kinds of things, right? Like you can really get a lot of information about a person's health through inhaling their breath. And so kissing might have evolved for that purpose, but then, of course, it lasts because of its sexual arousal, capabilities. Erotic touch also includes sensual massage. And one of the reasons why that's so pleasurable is that touch causes us to release endorphins, which make us feel good. And they also release dopamine, which makes us want to repeat the behavior that led to that release. So it's very pleasurable. And then there's mutual masturbation, where you touch each other's genitals. And so I found this depiction on that statue I keep showing you throughout class. It's really interesting because periodically different people have tried to attack this display of these ancient sculptures and deface them, and they literally defaced these people who are engaging in mutual masturbation. It's interesting because they didn't deface the person who's having sex with a donkey. They didn't deface a lot of other questionable behaviors, but this one did. So it's kind of an interesting, makes you wonder, what were they objecting to? This is actually from I don't want to pronounce it incorrectly, so I'll just let you read it. It's in India. And so, it's really, it really always makes me very curious. Why'd you guys decide to deface this one and not that one? And why'd you take off their faces and not let's say their genitals or something? It's really interesting what's been done to these different statues. But anyway, so these are our different categories of erotic touch that we can engage in. And usually it is kind of a progression that, once people start touching one another, it's usually kissing, and then we escalate to sensual massage, or maybe those two might flip. It's possible, but mutual masturbation is usually going to come a little later. And so, it's a progression. Then there's oral sex. And I promised you I would try and focus on, artistic rendering. So this is actually a drawing that was made by an artist who, I'm not exactly sure when he drew this, but I can tell you that his years of life were 1827 to 1906. So this would be early pornography. And a lot of artists made money to support their artist lifestyle by selling basically pornographic images that were at the time illegal. You were not allowed to have this kind of thing. And I thought you guys would find it interesting because you can't see anything. It's you just have to know what's going on, right? Cunnilingus is the official term for oral sex performed on a female. Fellatio is the official term for oral sex performed on a male. And this one was painted, we actually know what year. Pablo Picasso painted it in 1902. I just have so many questions about this picture because it looks to me like you've got a little boy, and then the woman, it appears, that's performing oral sex on him. Why is she so grayish blue? I don't know. Picasso's hard to interpret anyway, but definitely I have some questions about these images, but they convey the meaning, right? And here's another artist who he lived between 1791 and 1882. So this is a really old depiction, very much of a line drawing. But this would be mutual oral sex, or what people call 69, right? But I mean, don't you kind of have a stereotype in your mind that, in the 1800s, they wouldn't have been doing something like this, but clearly someone was, because he had the, idea to draw it. So I don't think these behaviors are as modern as a lot of people think they are. So we've got cunnilingus, fellatio, and then mutual oral sex are the official terms for these. Now, some people object to oral sex. Some people don't like to do it, or they don't like to have it done to them. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about why they feel like that. One reason is hygiene. There's the problem of the sort of recreation areas being in very close proximity to sort of the waste treatment plants, right? So a lot of people are like, that doesn't seem very hygienic. Of course, with our modern lives and the access to soap and water and things like that, the hygiene argument isn't quite as meaningful as it once was. But a lot of people still, carry it. A lot of people still say, it doesn't seem like it'd be a great idea. And it is possible that, poor hygiene and things could lead to contracting, STIs in the mouth. And so it's not a crazy thing to think, but it's the likelihoods are smaller than I think a lot of people who hold this hygiene objection think that they are. People experience some anxiety if they are the person who's performing oral sex. They worry that maybe they're not doing it right, so they get some performance anxiety, and they're trying to provide pleasure to their partner, but they're not sure if they're doing it right or if the partner likes it, stuff like that. And then on the other side, when you're receiving oral sex, people oftentimes feel like, well, I'm being selfish, that, my partner's doing all this work and I'm just laying here enjoying it. Some people just think it's outright sinful. They'll say things like, well, like that St. Thomas, right? It's non-reproductive. It's an abomination. No children can come from that. Other people have argued that it's unnatural, right? Like this isn't what we were designed to do. But I'd like to point to the bonobo monkeys and say, they do whatever feels good. And I don't think that they've been watching a lot of pornography or anything that has been giving them, deviant ideas. I think they just do whatever feels good. And so I always think that if animals do it, then you can't make the argument that it's unnatural, because they're just doing whatever comes natural to them, right? So when we see other animals engaging in this behavior, I'm going to have to argue with the unnatural interpretation. I'm going to have to grant you that it is non-reproductive. I think it's pretty much a guarantee you're not making any babies through this method, but it's definitely not unnatural. Now, I wanted to give a nod to that hygiene argument and say, there are risks of contracting STIs or STDs, whichever way you want to call it, through different types of oral sex. So if it's a pink square, that means that you probably can contract that STD through that type of oral sex. But we're not exactly sure, but it's probable. It might be rare. So that's what the pinks mean. The green means we don't know for sure, but we don't think that's how you would contract it. So HIV, you could theoretically contract it through fellatio, either giving or receiving. When it has happened, they're like, this has rarely happened. It's probably not a very primary transmission. There's no risk of contracting cunnilingus through giving or receiving oral sex. So there's never been a case contracted that way. Hepatitis B and hepatitis C are the two that we're concerned with, and they have been associated with being the performer of oral sex, either fellatio or cunnilingus. It's rare, they say, but it's possible. Now, human papillomavirus, which is the next row, HPV, it can be contracted by giving fellatio or by giving cunnilingus. And that's a firm yes. You absolutely can get human papillomavirus, which is genital warts in your mouth. Herpes simplex virus 1 is the kind of cold sore that you get on your mouth. And you can have somebody's cold sore from their mouth transfer onto your genitals through performing fellatio if you have a penis, or through performing cunnilingus if you have vulva. So it can come from the mouth and get onto the genitals. Now, herpes simplex 1 that's on the genitals rarely transfers back to the mouth though, but it's possible. So you could get, if the type of herpes that the person has on their genitals is herpes simplex 1, then and you perform oral sex, either fellatio or cunnilingus, you could contract the herpes simplex 1 onto your mouth. It's rare, but it's possible. And the reason why it's rare is because most people who have herpes on their genitals have herpes simplex 2. And that type of virus rarely hops from the genitals onto the mouth. So that's thought to be really rare. Chlamydia cannot be caught when you are receiving oral sex, whether it's fellatio or cunnilingus, and neither can gonorrhea. But you can contract chlamydia or gonorrhea in your mouth if you perform oral sex, whether it's fellatio or cunnilingus. Gonorrhea is more likely than chlamydia to be transmitted that way, but you can get chlamydia and gonorrhea, either one of those, in your mouth. And then syphilis, you can contract through giving or receiving fellatio. Giving cunnilingus, they say yes, and receiving, they think probably, but they're not. It's got to be really rare. They're not sure. So it's, most of the boxes are at least pink, and so it's risky. A lot of people think, well, oral sex has no risks associated with it. You can't get pregnant. That's true. Can't get any STIs. That's not true. So people need to be really careful when performing oral sex. Either cover the genitals with a condom that doesn't have any kind of lubricant on it, or a dental dam, or saran wrap just as a cover. Don't wrap it around anything, just kind of as a cover if you're not sure the status of the person's genitals, because you don't want to contract things in your mouth. You don't want to get it on your genitals from someone's mouth, stuff like that. What about anal stimulation? Anal stimulation with the tongue is called analingus, and I thought I'd share with you the graphic on that, analingus, and the likelihood of contracting sexually transmitted infections from that. You can get hepatitis A or B by performing analingus, not by receiving, just by performing. They think herpes simplex virus 1 can transfer off of the anus onto somebody's mouth, off of the mouth onto somebody's anus. So that's possible. And then syphilis, they think, could possibly be transmitted through this route, but the others appear to be green. So analingus has some risks, that's for sure. What about anal intercourse? Well, here we have a graphic that shows the percentage of, the percentage of people who have had anal sex with the opposite sex is in the blue bars. And so what you're seeing is male, female dyads who have had anal sex. And it's a lot higher than it was even 20 years ago. I think a lot of it has been increasing thanks to the internet, people seeing people doing stuff. But you can see that it's a lot less common than, oral sex or vaginal sex with the opposite sex. So it's become a lot more common. So it's become something that I'm talking about more in my classes than I used to, because it used to be, 10% of people were engaging in this behavior. But now it's becoming really common, fairly common. And so with anal intercourse, what we really want to worry about is making sure that we don't tear the rectum, because that skin, it has no lubrication. It has no, protective abilities. And so you can tear it really easily. And then now you have an open route to the bloodstream for anything that's contained in the semen. And so gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, HIV has a direct route into the bloodstream. And so infection is a lot more likely through that route. So people who engage in anal intercourse need to definitely use lubricants, and they definitely need to use condoms to protect from transmission of sexually transmitted infections. Coitus, which is where you engage in penile vaginal sex. It is a very specific word that refers specifically to a penis and a vagina. So the frequency of penile vaginal sex, okay. Another one of these very strange I don't know if we can trust them kind of maps where, again, when you're looking at whole regions being colored one color and other regions being colored a different color. But I did pull it because, we're sort of in one of the regions where, oh, look how active people are. Yes, but I don't know what it means, and I don't even know if it's true. So that was just for our entertainment. One thing we do know from the National Survey of Sexual Attitudes and Lifestyles is that people are having less sex than they were in the 1990s. So in 1990-91, the average number of times per month the men reported was 6.4 and the women reported 6.1. By 1999 to 2001, it was 6.2 and 6.3. And then by 2010, 2012, we're down to 4.9, 4.8. Now, 2010, 2012, we were in the middle of a recession and a bunch of things that might have made people, less active, and it might have been a blip. I'm waiting for the next round of data. If you look at these dates, you can kind of tell we must be getting close to another one being released. But I'm hoping that was just a little blip, that it was kind of recession tied, things like that, because we do not want to end up where Japan is. Japan, this is looking at people who are married. So how often do you have sex with your spouse was the question. And that big green area, that dark green area, not for over a year. That's the most common response. 34%, not for over a year. Then we got 3% who say once a year, 10% who say once every 6 months, 10% who say once every 3 months, 16% who say once a month. And then we get to, I don't know, what is that? Burnt sienna, 13% who say once every 2 weeks. Brown is once a week, and that's 10%. We got 3% who say once every 3 days, and that 0% who say every day. So that's not very good. We do not want to end up there because having coitus with your, romantic partner is part of the bonding that keeps couples together. And so generally it's not considered super healthy for a long-term lasting relationship to not be engaging in sexual activity. Now, that is not to say that individual couples don't have variations on how often they do things. But when we look at, this kind of survey data where large numbers of people were queried, and this is the pattern that came out, it looks like there's like a cultural thing going on. There's something going on. It's not idiosyncratic couple by couple, and an individual can be completely happy having sex, once a year. That's completely different, and that's not what we're talking about. We're looking at an entire, cultural pattern, and not really where we really think people should be going as far as sexual health. So it brings up the issue of how often do people have sex after they get married? A lot of people don't want to get married. They'll stay with their live-in relationship because they're like, well, the second we get married, it's going to kill the sex life. And here we have, he gets he spins the roulette wheel each night to find out if he's having sex tonight. Odds are against him, but she says, oh, you can have another spin, but only because it's your birthday. So he gets double the chances on his birthday. That's quite the stereotype, right? Isn't that the typical stereotype that once you get married, you don't have sex anymore? It turns out that married couples in the U.S. report that they typically have sex on average twice a week. So that, of course, doesn't speak to any individual couple. But most couples continue to have sex throughout their marriage at a reasonably, consistent rate. And so it's something that probably should be relegated to the category of stereotype rather than reality. How about the duration? How long does coitus last? So again, with these weird maps, I don't know how they would even have the data on this. How long does coitus last? All right, if you hear a duck quacking, that's my clock chirping. So the average duration of coitus is actually not as long as one might think, because we only count coitus when we're talking about the actual penis in the vagina, actually, thrusting, the actual coitus. All the stuff that leads up to it, the oral sex, the genital touching, the sensual massage, all that stuff that led up to it, we don't count that part, right? Because that's not coitus. So when we're talking about coitus, we are talking about, a few minutes, a couple minutes, something like that. And that's probably as it should be, because for most women in a heterosexual relationship, they aren't really usually looking to have really protracted coitus. They're looking to have very satisfying, other activities, whether it's oral sex or mutual masturbation or whatever they want to engage in. That's usually where orgasm's going to come from and things like that. Coitus for women is not the number one way of achieving orgasm. So about a couple of minutes on average. And if we look around the world, it looks like the Australians beat us. They report 4.02 minutes duration. I don't know why it's not in order of length of time. Like who color codes a map and doesn't put it in order? It's very strange. But so it looks like the Australians are one of the 10 most active countries, and they're ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about the likelihood of coitus during orgasm during coitus is what I meant to say. Now, this is from a study conducted by Armstrong et al. In 2012. And it's the percent of men and women reporting that they had an orgasm in 4 different sexual contexts. So on the far left for both sexes, they're talking about when they had sex at the first time they hooked up with a person. The next bar in to the right is when they had 1 to 2 previous hookups with that same person. The next bar in is 3 or more previous hookups with that same person. And then the farthest on the right is they are in a relationship with that person. And so we're looking at the percentage, the likelihood that the person had an orgasm the last time they had sex with this person. And so one of the things that you'll notice is that, there's a stair step where men become more and more likely to have orgasms when they are with somebody who they're in a relationship with. But for the women, there's like this giant jump up when they're in a relationship. They are much more likely to reach orgasm if they're having sex with somebody that they're in a relationship with. Now, in the same study, they broke it down a little bit differently. So we have now along the x-axis are those 4 different relationship contexts. And the y-axis is still the percent who reported having an orgasm. And now we're looking at just the women who were surveyed. And in the bars, we're seeing the different sex acts that they engaged in that last, sexual interaction that they had with the person that they're talking about. So on the far left is oral sex only. The next one in is intercourse only. The next one in is intercourse and oral sex. The next one is intercourse and self-stimulation. And then the farthest right is intercourse, oral, and self-stimulation. So you can see across, just sort of at a glance, you can see first hookup and 1 to 2 previous hookups overall as having, lower rates of orgasm, with the one exception being if everything was done, right? So on those far right bars, you're seeing intercourse, oral, and self-stimulation. They were very likely to have reached orgasm, even if it was their first hookup or they'd hooked up only 1 or 2 times before. With their third or more previous hookup, you can see that even engaging in fewer acts, now that they're with somebody who they've been with several times, now they're starting to have higher rates of orgasm with intercourse and oral sex, intercourse and self-stimulation, or intercourse, oral, and self-stimulation. So more hookups is associated with more orgasmic responsiveness. And then on the far right, when they are in a relationship, you see that they are more likely to have achieved orgasm altogether. But look at that lower bar, the one that's the lowest there, intercourse only. So 55% of the women reported that they achieved orgasm with their partner who they're in a relationship with when they engaged in intercourse only. So it's a bit of a crapshoot that a woman would reach orgasm just through intercourse, right? It's a 50-50 proposition. And yeah, it's completely possible that a woman can reach orgasm through coitus, but it's much more likely that she'll reach orgasm through something else, one of the other activities or a combination of other activities. So that's the thing I wanted to kind of leave us with is that, coitus, the length of time that thrusting occurs or something like that really isn't the determining factor when you're in a heterosexual couple of a woman reaching orgasm. It's all the other stuff that goes on around that. And women are much more sexually responsive on average, based on the research, when they're in a relationship than they are when it's a hookup, especially the first time hookup. All right. Well, that concludes sexual behaviors. So I will see you guys in the next chapter.